This is the story of a great river, an ambitious plan to harness and tame that river, and how that plan was transformed into a model of modern floodplain management. Enormous in size, the Upper St. Johns River Basin Project has won support from agriculturalists and environmentalists alike, and is hailed as a major step in providing a workable balance between the need for flood control and a variety of ecological concerns. Aimed at reviving the headwater marshes of Florida's longest river, the plan calls for acquiring huge tracts of land and then spreading a wide sheet of water over former farmlands to restore the marshes that feed the river. The largest and most ambitious federal flood control project of its kind in the nation, the project will reclaim more than 235 square miles of river marshes and more than triple the functional wetlands in the headwaters of the St. Johns River.
Well, the Upper St. Johns was conceived as part of a vast lattice of massive dikes and drainage canals, a complex plumbing network which is the Central and Southern Florida Flood Control Project. The CNSF is considered by engineers as one of the most sophisticated water management systems in the world and held in equal esteem by many environmentalists as one of the most disruptive to the natural river systems. The Upper St. Johns marshes in the early and mid-1900s suffered much the same fate that befell Florida's Everglades, as thousands of acres of river valley floodplains in the river's headwaters were drained to create fertile farmlands. The project goals include better flood protection, cleaner water, enhanced fish and wildlife habitat, more public recreation, and restored river marshes reminiscent of those at the turn of the century before they were drained to the brink of extinction. The Upper St. Johns is unique among river projects because of its semi-structural approach to water management, relying less on artificial controls and more on natural river floodplains. The project controls floods not only with dams and levees, but by allowing restored wetlands to act like huge sponges that absorb excess rain and then slowly release those waters during the dry season. In this way, the river, with human help, will function more as nature intended, and we've certainly learned that working with Mother Nature is preferable to working against her.
For hundreds of years after Europeans first set foot on the Florida Peninsula, settlements were located along the coast because of the dense jungle-like wilderness that made up the interior of the state. That changed in the early 1900s when steam shovels began cutting across Florida's watery interior to reclaim swampland for agriculture and development. These grand drainage schemes extended to the broad marshes of the St. Johns, where Florida's longest river is reborn each day. Canals were dug to shuttle large amounts of fresh water from the St. Johns marshes eastward to the Indian River Lagoon, opening up thousands of acres of nutrient-rich floodplain for citrus, row crops, and cattle. Half a century later, 2/3 of the river's floodplain, which at one point spanned nearly 30 miles across, was pinched to less than a mile wide. By the early 1970s, more than 60% of the river's floodplain was gone. Devastating hurricanes in the 1920s and 40s resulted in the creation of the Central and Southern Florida Flood Control Project, a massive flood control scheme that made Florida one of the world's largest agricultural producers of row crops, citrus, and beef cattle. This vast plumbing system also drained vast wetland areas, linked Lake Okeechobee to the coast through a lattice of canals, and changed the gentle oxbows of the Kissimmee River into a straight 60-mile canal. The Congressional Act was amended in 1954 to include the upper reaches of the St. Johns River. It was another dozen years before construction began in 1966. As part of the plan, flooding would be reduced in the upper St. Johns Basin by diverting large amounts of water from the river's marshes to the Indian River Lagoon. Downstream, floodwaters could be stored in huge upland reservoirs west of the river valley.
Well, I objected to cutting the river in a ditch through the river, and we would have had another Kissimmee River, really what we would have had. And it was pure destruction, and not for the public interest, but for whoever owned the land would own it, just like the argument you've got in the Everglades right now.
By 1970, a 35-mile levee and reservoir system was nearing completion, and the C-54 canal was operational, providing the flood protection for the area's agricultural interests, which included the world-famous Indian River citrus industry. The C-54 canal can move nearly 45,000 gallons of water per second. While impacts of these discharges to the Indian River Lagoon weren't fully understood in the 1960s, we now know that massive amounts of fresh water can be harmful to shellfish and other wildlife which thrive in the lagoon's brackish waters. It seemed as if another well-intentioned plan to tame Mother Nature and reclaim worthless swampland was about to wreak unforeseen harm on not one, but two ecosystems, the Indian River Lagoon and the Upper St. Johns River. Bob Dylan sang "The Times They Are A-Changin'," and that effectively sums up what was happening in the late 1960s and early 70s. The Central and Southern Florida Flood Control Project was met head-on by the country's raised awareness in the environment, and that's as far as the project got.
That's when all of the major legislation environmental legislation that we operate under today was coming out of both the federal government and the state government. The environmental impact statement requirements was something new on the scene. Chapter 373 came out of the 1970 legislature. And it was just a time that we were fortunate that we recognized what was happening and were able legally to take action.
Construction was halted on the federal project in 1972, and then the state of Florida withdrew its sponsorship in 2 years thereafter. A number of studies were conducted. Our agency, the St. Johns River Water Management District, became involved in 1977. We did a number of studies, we held hearings in the local area, and then we took into account the environmental concerns. The project was then approved in 1980.
Starts at this corner.
In 1982, the Army Corps of Engineers agreed to the plan, and a new environmental impact statement and design was prepared, favoring a semi-structural approach. The Upper St. Johns River Basin project stretches 75 miles from the Florida Turnpike in southern Indian River County northward to Lake Washington in central Brevard County. To support this vast land-intensive project, the St. Johns River Water Management District initiated an aggressive land acquisition program in the early 1980s. Since then, more than 66,000 acres of farmland have been bought at a cost of nearly $100 million to support the construction and operation of the project. In addition, the Water Management District spent $14 million to acquire another 39,000 acres of wetlands north of the federal project area as part of its basin-wide initiative to protect and preserve the St. Johns floodplains. Nearly complete, the Upper St. Johns project is more semi-structural in design than most traditional public water projects. It allows water to be managed more by nature through increased water storage and use of conservation areas within the historic River Valley floodplains. Still, the project relies on a 100-mile system of flood protection levees, 6 major gated spillways, and some 15 smaller water control structures, culverts, and weirs to restore flows through the recreated marshes. The plan diverts agricultural stormwater runoff into large reservoirs called water management areas. There, the water is available for reuse. Under this plan, agricultural waters are segregated from the higher quality wetlands in the adjacent marsh conservation areas.
To implement the project, the Water Management District will pay for all land costs, while the Corps of Engineers will fund all project construction. The recreation, like boat ramps, will be cost shared on a 50-50 basis. Throughout the process, the Water Management District and the Corps are enjoying a true partnership. This partnership is a model for all future sustainable development throughout the basin.
A central feature of the project is Blue Cypress Lake and its surrounding marshes, among the most pristine areas in the state and one of the top sport fishing areas in Florida. During a tour of the project, the worldwide commander of the Corps cited the redesigned Upper St. John's project, a model of sustainable development.
You don't necessarily have to have a structural solution to it. This project here is probably a good example where you've got a combination of a few structural parts of the project, but you've got a lot of non-structural solutions to it, and I think this is a good shining example of the type of project that we're trying to promote and others are looking forward to.
Before making changes to the existing flood control project, water managers had to convince the farmers in the region that it was in their best interest to take valuable land out of production and allow it to return to its original marsh conditions.
Yeah, at first we were very apprehensive about this project. For 1/5 of this county would be taken out of production, potential production. And this is a very viable area of the Indian River District. But as we worked with the Army Corps of Engineers and with the district, we felt that the answers we were getting were the right answers. And we supported the project, and we're on record in support of that project.
When St. John's came and wanted to buy the land, there was a apprehension on our part and other farmers that had land to sell, because they were afraid they'd sell good productive land and never be used for anything, and they'd lose the income from it. And so they talked to St. John's for a long time before they sold, and St. John's reassured us that the land would be put to good use, beneficial use, and it has. The project has moved ahead. The money was there, the funding was there to make it work. It's been a very good project. The agriculture interests are very pleased with it. Environmental interests are pleased. Everything has come together.
In 1989, we had a devastating freeze come through the river. Temperatures on the west side of the marsh were in the teens, but as that air mass came over the marsh towards the east, it warmed up into the mid-20s, which saved our crop, and 70,000 acres of citrus that wouldn't have gone to the market did go to the market because of the benefits of the warm air going over that marsh.
The difficult thing for some folks to understand is even though it's a wetland, fire is an important part of that ecosystem. Fire is a part of all ecosystems in Florida, whether they be wetlands or upland. So under prescribed conditions, we'll go in and begin fires in a prescribed burn because we've seen the positive effects that can happen when the vegetation is enhanced by the fire and the wildlife responds to it. In some cases, we've seen wildlife move into prescribed burns minutes after the fire's passed.
Land managers from the St. Johns River Water Management District are working to restore the different ecosystems as close as possible to nature's design within the framework of this vast flood control project. Environmental scientists from the district are working with the Florida Game and Freshwater Fish Commission and researchers from the University of Florida to study fish and bird populations in areas in the project.
We're going to be known for not only whether we can maintain the flood control service, but whether or not we can also meet our objectives in improving the fish and wildlife benefits of that region. To demonstrate whether we are meeting those objectives, it's important to have baseline information. So our first few years, we're endeavoring to gather information on the fish, the birds, threatened and endangered species, and plant communities to see how the project looks, or the canvas looks, before we begin the painting, in this case the water management manipulation. Over the many years of water management work out there, we should see responses to the vegetative communities and then the corresponding fish and wildlife benefits. And it's going to be important to track that with our partners, the Florida Game and Freshwater Fish Commission, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and other private foundations.
Water samples are regularly taken from dozens of sites throughout the project to better understand how and where water quality is affected. This information will be used to establish maximum allowable levels of nutrients, phosphorus, and other pollutants flowing into the river to protect the water quality. The marshes have improved because of enhanced water quality and increases in the fish and wildlife habitat. Nearly a quarter of the population of the endangered snail kite, also known as the Everglades kite, has called the project area home.
I'm going to stick a hood on him in just a second.
Researchers with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Florida Game and Freshwater Fish Commission are fitting these birds with radio transmitters in order to track them and learn more about them.
What I'm interested in is two things. One is survival of adults and juveniles and how that's influenced by where they are and what the water levels are, and then also dispersal, where they are, their distribution throughout the state, and how that's influenced by water levels, etc.
Snail kites are important to the entire Upper St. Johns project because as an endangered species, federal law prohibits any changes in water levels or habitat that can have an adverse impact on the birds. Thus, the project will be managed to protect the kites' nesting sites and their sole food source, apple snails. Another more purposeful species has been drawn to the project by the thousands. Fishermen in search of trophy-sized largemouth bass. And they're going home happy because of the productivity of the newly flooded lands. Two hot spots that have drawn worldwide attention are the Stick Marsh and Farm 13. Two former farms used to create the 6,000-acre St. Johns Water Management Area near Fellsmere in Indian River County. Fishing here was good enough to convince Jerry Austin to move his tackle and guide business to Fellsmere from Tavares in Lake County. He's been busy guiding tourists from across the United States and Canada to a number of spots in the Upper St. Johns.
Well, I tell them that they need 6 to 9 dozen shiners a day, and that's an 8-hour day fishing, and that they will get in Stick Marsh, when the fishing is real good, I have caught as many as 100 bass, boated 100 bass in one day.
Because water in the St. Johns Water Management Area is reused to irrigate row crops and citrus, water quality is declining. However, new marsh areas are already becoming the top destinations for the country's top anglers, as well as those heading for a restful Florida fishing vacation. The Three Forks Marsh Conservation Area, west of Palm Bay, is expected to be an outstanding sustainable fishery. For David and Sue Strickland, the project truly is home to them. While Sue is a wildlife painter, David enjoys photography. And both of them are hunters, and they're passing on a deep, abiding love for this piece of wild Florida to their daughter.
It transcends from river habitat on into marsh habitat, on up into oak and palm hammocks like this one, and then there's pine and palmetto flatwoods. There's just all kinds of habitat, all kinds of good things for just a myriad of life. There's just everything in the world out there.
You know, it's things like this that make life worth living, especially to us. The experience we have as a family and as a couple, you know, being out in the woods and just having that intimate experience in the woods and being close to nature, it's a very valuable thing.
A partnership between the Water Management District and the private conservation group, Ducks Unlimited, has enhanced nearly 4,000 acres for waterfowl. On-site management is provided by the Florida Game and Freshwater Fish Commission. These productive marshes have quickly attracted ducks and geese during both migratory and non-migratory periods of the year. Opportunities are also increasing for nature study, hiking, and camping on the project area. Trails have been cut and are maintained by volunteers of the Florida Trail Association. Additional campsites are being planned as the project nears completion. While efforts to harness the Upper St. Johns River began nearly 100 years ago, the Upper St. Johns Project has emerged and evolved during the past 4 decades, culminating in a project that addresses all concerned.
The project has stored a lot of water for both agriculture and the environment. I think from what we can understand, talking to other people around the world, this is a role model for a lot of people who have come from different countries, different parts of the United States to look at it, because it's solving a lot of problems that both the environment and ag interests were having before it was started. So I think both the environmentalists and the agriculture interests are very pleased with it.
Right now it's the best bass fishing in the state of Florida and anywhere that I know of at the present time, because of the number of bass you can catch. And I think it will improve as they keep adding new areas, new impoundments, and they keep stocking them, that the fishing will just get better. I'm all for that.
I think we both, agriculture and the public, can share that and have a fine place and both get our jobs done.
It's a project that perhaps in this day and age is one of those you can look to as a good example of how we're trying to balance the needs of society. It incorporates flood control. It takes into consideration all the environmental issues that we have these days. It provides a habitat for wildlife. It also takes into consideration our water supply problems and the quality of our water. And this project is probably one of the several projects that we have ongoing that people should be looking to as an example of what we can do if we do come together and put on the table all the issues that people want us to consider.
This project is no panacea for all the river's ills, but by helping nature heal the scars of past abuse and neglect at the hands of her masters, the Upper Basin Project strikes a balance between the needs of the river with the people and creatures who depend on it. By saving these marshes, the Upper St. Johns River Project will leave a tremendous natural legacy to future generations. People who will enjoy the natural beauty and generosity of the St. Johns River for years to come will thank the day that someone had the foresight to act in time to save it by giving nature a second chance.
With completion expected in 1997, the Upper St. Johns River Basin Project is the largest river restoration and flood control project currently under construction. It will provide water for irrigation to agricultural interests during dry times and flood control during wet. Water quality will also be improved, resulting in improved wildlife habitat. And sensitive coastal estuaries will be protected from massive discharges of fresh water, which can be harmful to shellfish and other marine life. Because of all this, opportunities for public recreation will also increase. Fishing, hunting, hiking, boating, and nature study will allow still more people to see a part of natural, old Florida that had disappeared and has received a second chance. The marshy headwaters of the St. Johns, where the river is reborn each day.